Welcome to a saga of reckless pride, second chances, and the inevitable justice of fate. Before we dive into the chilling moment that reshaped one man's destiny, grab your tissues. If you're a believer that true love deserves a second shot and that karma always delivers, hit that subscribe button and smash the like on this video right now. You won't want to miss how the universe humbled the man who had everything, except a heart. He laughed and scoffed. "You think I'm going to give up my empire for you?" 6 years later, he saw her again, accompanied by 2 young boys who were his exact mirror image. Chapter 1. The Fortress of Alexander Thorne. The sound of Manhattan late at night was always the same for Alexander Thorne. A silent, hungry hum, full of ambition and movement, hidden beneath a veneer of calm. From the penthouse window of his office at Thorne Global Capital, he could see it all. The blinding skyline, the Hudson River slicing through the darkness, the streets that never seemed to sleep. He had built this world himself, brick by calculated brick, through sheer will and brutal discipline. Every decision was measured, every risk controlled. There was no room for chaos, no room for weakness, and certainly no room for love. That was why, 6 years ago, when Ilara Vance stood in this very office with tears streaming down her hazel eyes, he chose his empire over her. "You think I'm going to give up my empire for you?" he'd said with a chilling laugh, the words sliding out like a honed blade. He hadn't wanted to hurt her. He had wanted to remind himself that he didn't need her. But as soon as the door closed behind her, the silence flooded the room like a gaping wound. Back then, Ilara had been the only person who ever made him feel anything human. She wasn't impressed by his billions or the way people treated him like a god in a bespoke suit. She saw the man underneath, the one desperate to prove he would never be powerless again. She loved him for reasons he couldn't comprehend, and it terrified him. When she told him she was pregnant, his first instinct wasn't joy. It was fear. Fear of losing control, fear of vulnerability, fear of being anchored to something real. He told himself it was impossible, that she was lying or mistaken. But deep down, he knew the truth. He just couldn't face it. After that night, he buried himself in work, as if the noise of success could drown out the echo of her voice. He expanded his company, doubled his wealth, and filled his days with meaningless affairs that never lasted more than a few weeks. He told himself he was happy, that he had chosen correctly, but every now and then, something cracked his carefully constructed armor. A stranger's laugh that reminded him of her, the sound of a child's voice in a crowd, the faint scent of gardenia that brought back memories he didn't want. Meanwhile, somewhere far away, Ilara was learning to survive. She moved to a quiet, rugged town on the coast of Maine, where the air smelled of pine and sea salt. She gave birth to twin boys, Leo and Finn, 2 small miracles who looked at her with the same piercing eyes that once made her fall in love. She raised them alone, working long shifts at a small local bakery and sketching late into the night when the boys slept. There were times she wanted to call him, to tell him his sons were beautiful and perfect. But then she remembered his voice, cold and distant, and she reminded herself that she didn't need him anymore. For Alexander, success only deepened the void. Every award, every headline, every new contract signed brought less satisfaction than the last. His office, once his fortress, began to feel like a cage. Late at night, he would sit in silence, wondering what his life would have been like if he had chosen differently. He had everything a man could desire, yet there was a hollow space in his chest that nothing seemed to fill. Rumors circulated in business circles about how ruthless he had become, how utterly devoid of emotion. People admired him, feared him, envied him, but no one truly knew him. He had built his walls so high that not even he could see over them. Sometimes, when he looked in the mirror, he didn't recognize the man staring back. One evening, he poured a glass of whiskey and leaned back in his chair. The city lights reflected in the glass, creating golden flashes that reminded him of her hair. Without realizing it, he whispered her name. The sound felt alien on his tongue. He stood abruptly, angry at himself for even thinking of her. But the truth was, he never stopped. Deep down, he knew that if he ever saw her again, if he ever saw the child she claimed was his, he wouldn't be able to walk away a second time. Outside, the rain began to fall, softly tapping against the glass walls of his office. He closed his eyes and imagined what their life might be now. Did she ever think of him? Did the child have his eyes? He told himself it didn't matter, that it was too late. But the ache in his chest told him otherwise. For the first time in years, Alexander Thorne, the man who owned it all, felt completely powerless. He didn't know it yet, but life has a way of forcing even the proudest men to face what they have tried to outrun. And soon, fate would bring him face to face with the very truth he had spent 6 years fleeing. Chapter 2. The Inevitable Encounter. The morning light poured over the park in Boston's public garden, soft and golden, touching every leaf and blade of grass as if the world itself had been newly painted. Alexander Thorne should not have been there. He never went to places like this, too casual, too full of noise, and a life he no longer understood. But that Sunday morning, at the insistent invitation of a business partner, he found himself walking down a narrow, tree-lined path. He was half listening to the sound of children laughing somewhere nearby when something, an instinct buried deep in his gut, made him stop dead. His eyes scanned the open field until he found her. Elara. She was sitting on the grass beneath a large oak tree, her hair brighter in the sunlight than he remembered, her head tilted slightly as she watched 2 small boys tossing a bright red ball back and forth. The boys looked identical, their laughter filling the air, their faces bright with that wild, carefree joy only children possess. And then, as one of them turned toward him, Alexander felt the air leave his lungs. The boy's eyes, deep, sharp, and familiar brown, were his own. He stood frozen, unable to move. He hadn't seen her in 6 years, hadn't dared to look, and yet here she was, unaltered, yet completely different. She looked older, yes, but stronger too, as if the years had sculpted both grace and resilience into her. She hadn't seen him yet, and for a moment, he almost turned and fled. But something stronger than pride held him there. When she finally looked up, their eyes met. Time stopped. For one beat. There was nothing else. No people, no noise, no distance. Just 6 years of silence, suddenly shattering in the space between them. Her face changed in an instant. Surprise, disbelief, then a stillness that cut him deeper than anger ever could have. Alexander walked toward her slowly, each step heavier than the last. He wanted to speak, but the words were lost. She didn't stand up. She simply looked up at him with the same quiet, steady gaze that once made him feel utterly exposed. When he finally stopped in front of her, she spoke in a low voice. "You shouldn't be here." Her voice was flat, even, but he heard the tremor beneath it. "Elara," he began, his throat dry. "I didn't know." She cut him off before he could finish. "You didn't want to know." It wasn't an accusation. It was a simple fact. He opened his mouth again, but nothing came out. The boys were looking up at him now with curiosity, their forgotten ball rolling in the grass. One of them tugged on her sleeve and whispered, "Mom, who is that man?" The word hit him harder than any punch. "Mom." She placed her hand on the boy's shoulder and said softly, "No one you need to worry about." The dismissal was gentle, but it gutted him. He had never pictured himself as a father, yet standing there, looking at those two boys, something inside him snapped open. He saw himself in them, not just in their faces, but in their gestures, the way they stood, even the way they tilted their heads when curious. He wanted to say something, anything, to make her understand how wrong he had been, but the moment was already gone. He left the park that day without another word, his mind a storm. The image of her, of them, was seared into his thoughts. He drove home in silence, every mile feeling like a punishment. In his penthouse that night, surrounded by glass and steel, he couldn't escape the sound of their laughter echoing in his memory. For the first time in years, he didn't feel powerful. He felt empty. He poured a drink, but the whiskey didn't burn like it used to. He left it untouched. He went to the window and looked out at the city, the empire he had chosen over her. And for the very first time, he wondered if any of it had been worth it. That night, sleep would not come. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw them. Ilara's slight smile as she watched the boys, the way one of them brushed hair from his forehead, a gesture so familiar it hurt. He thought of the day she told him she was pregnant, the disbelief, the anger, the cruel laugh that followed. He had wanted to protect himself then, to keep control. Now, he realized he had been protecting nothing but his own emptiness. Interactive question. If you were Ilara, after 6 years of raising them alone, would you allow Alexander even a chance to know his sons? Or is the pain of the past too great to overcome? Comment with your answer, yes or no, and tell us why. Chapter 3. The Fight for Redemption. The following days unfolded in slow, restless waves. Alexander found himself returning to the park almost every weekend, telling himself he was just passing through, though deep down he knew it was a lie. He began to learn the rhythms of Ilara's new life, not through intrusion, but through quiet observation. She came to the park on Sundays, always at the same time, with a picnic blanket and a small basket of snacks. The boys ran ahead, their laughter bouncing through the trees, while she followed with her sketchbook and that same old thermos she used to carry years ago. There was something both healing and painful about watching her like this. He had once been a part of her world, and now he was just a distant observer, standing on the boundaries of what could have been his life. The more he saw, the more he understood how utterly he had been erased, not out of cruelty, but out of necessity. She had built stability where he had left chaos, warmth where he had given coldness. One afternoon, he couldn't resist approaching again. This time, the boys were closer, chasing each other around the bench where she was sitting. He noticed the way she smiled at them, the same smile she used to give him when she still believed in him. He walked toward her slowly, his hands shoved deep into his coat pockets as if to keep them from trembling. She looked up before he spoke, her eyes narrowing slightly, but without the shock she'd shown before. "You don't give up easily," she said quietly. Her tone was not mockery, just weariness, as if she had accepted that he would keep returning, no matter how hard she tried to push him away. He hesitated before sitting on the far end of the bench. "I just want to talk," he said. She nodded slightly, her gaze returning to the twins. "Talking won't fix anything," she murmured. He followed her line of sight and replied softly, "Maybe not, but it's a start." They sat in silence for a long time. The boys were now kicking a soccer ball, their cheers scattering across the park. Alexander watched them with an ache in his chest he didn't know how to describe. Every small movement they made, every giggle, every stumble. it all felt like pieces of him reflected back. "They're beautiful," he finally said. She didn't answer for a while, then spoke low, almost a whisper. "They're strong. I had to make sure they were." There was pride in her tone, but also exhaustion. He turned to her. "You did it all by yourself," he said. It wasn't a question. She nodded. "I had no choice." He wanted to tell her how sorry he was, but the words felt empty compared to the weight of what she had endured. Instead, he asked softly, "What are their names?" She paused before answering. "Leo and Finn." The names floated in the air, and he repeated them silently to himself, as if trying to etch them into his memory. Then, one of the boys tripped on a small rock and tumbled to the ground. Before Alara could move, Alexander was already standing, crossing the few steps that separated them. The boy, Leo, he thought, looked up at him with wide brown eyes full of surprise and confusion. "Hey, it's okay," Alexander said softly, kneeling beside him and checking for scrapes. "You're a brave one, aren't you?" The boy blinked, uncertain but comforted by the calm in his voice. Alara reached them a moment later, her breathing hitched, and Alexander immediately stepped aside. "He's fine," he said. She gave him a swift, tired look before kneeling to check him herself. As she saw the small scrape on Leo's knee, she smiled and brushed his hair from his forehead. "You'll live, soldier," she whispered, kissing his brow. Alexander stood silent, feeling a knot in his chest at the simple tenderness. After she patched up the small cut with a bandage from her bag, she stood and faced him. For the first time, there was no anger in her eyes, just depletion. "You can't keep showing up like this, Alexander," she said quietly. "They don't know who you are, and I don't know how to explain it." He nodded, his voice barely a whisper. "I don't expect you to. I just need you to know that I'm not leaving again." She studied him for a moment, searching his face for any trace of the man she used to know. "You said that once before," she said finally. "And then you left." He didn't argue. He knew he had no right to defend himself. "I know," he said quietly. "And that's why I'm here now." They didn't speak again after that. The boys called out to her, and she turned to join them. But before she left, she looked back one last time. It was a small gesture, almost hesitant, but it was enough to keep him standing there long after she was gone. When he finally left the park, the evening sky had turned orange and gold, and for the first time in years, Alexander felt something close to hope, a fragile, trembling hope that ached in his chest but kept him breathing. Turn on notifications, because what Alexander does next is not what you expect from a ruthless businessman. Comment below. What concrete action should Alexander take to prove to Alara that he has truly changed? Chapter 4. The Silent Rebuilding. That night, he found himself thinking about everything she had said. He realized that if he wanted her to believe him, he had to prove it with actions, not words. The next day, he canceled 2 major meetings and called his lawyer, inquiring about legal ways to support her and the boys without invading her life. He didn't want to buy forgiveness. He wanted to earn it. His lawyer was stunned. Alexander Thorne was known for being ruthless, not sentimental. But he didn't care. He had spent years hiding behind walls of pride and success. Now, for the first time, he wanted to build something real, even if it started from the ground up. He didn't know if Alara would ever forgive him, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He wouldn't stop trying. He had once laughed at the idea of giving up everything for love. Now, finally, he understood that love wasn't about sacrifice. It was about showing up when it mattered most. The days turned into weeks, and Alexander's life began to change in ways that surprised even him. The office that once felt like the center of his universe no longer held the same power over him. Meetings blurred together, contracts lost their urgency, and he started spending more time outside his tower of steel and glass. He told no one why. He was no longer chasing expansion or dominance. He was chasing something far more fragile: redemption. He visited the park almost every weekend when he knew Alara would be there, but this time he didn't approach. He kept his distance, letting her and the boys live their moments without his intrusion. He simply observed, learning who they were through the smallest details. The way Finn always tried to lead, but Leo had the gentler heart. How Alara laughed when they tackled her in the grass. How she looked at them as if they were her entire world. He had never seen love so simple, so selfless, and every time he witnessed it, a piece of his old arrogance cracked. One afternoon, he noticed Alara struggling with a cart full of groceries outside the bakery where she worked. Without thinking, he crossed the street and offered to help. She looked surprised at first, then wary. "Alexander, you can't keep doing this," she said, her tone quiet but firm. "You can't just keep appearing out of nowhere." He nodded, but gently took the heavy bag from her hands anyway. "I'm not trying to make you uncomfortable," he said quietly. "I just want to help." She exhaled, torn between refusing and allowing him this small act. "Help with what, exactly?" she finally asked. "You weren't there when I needed you most. You don't get to choose now." The words hurt, but he didn't react. "Then let me be here when you don't need me," he replied. "That's what I should have done in the first place." She stared at him for a long moment, confusion flickering behind her eyes. Something in his voice must have sounded different, less like the man she knew and more like someone trying to understand what it meant to stay. Finally, she nodded. Just once. "Fine," she said, "but that doesn't mean anything has changed." That evening, he carried her groceries up to her small apartment above the bakery. It was modest, warm, filled with soft light, and the scent of vanilla from candles on the counter. The boys were sitting at the table, drawing with crayons, their faces lighting up when they saw him. "Mom, that's the park man," said Leo, his excitement innocent and unaware of the tension between the adults. Alara smiled faintly but didn't respond. Alexander crouched down beside them, his heart pounding. "Hey, artists," he said softly. "What are you drawing?" Finn proudly held up a paper. "Us. This is me. That's Leo. And that's Mom." There were 3 stick figures holding hands, drawn with jagged lines, but full of life. He noticed there was an empty space beside them. "And who is this spot for?" he asked, pointing to the blank space. Finn shrugged. "No one yet," he said. "Maybe a dog. Alexander smiled, but the knot in his throat was heavy. He didn't want to cry in front of them, but the innocence in their voices broke something deep inside him. Alara watched the scene in silence. For the first time, she saw a different man than the one who had left her 6 years ago. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something that looked like regret and sincerity. After dinner, which she grudgingly allowed him to stay for, the boys fell asleep on the sofa, their heads resting against each other. Alexander stood quietly beside them, watching them breathe. "They are incredible," he said softly. She crossed her arms, still protective. "They had to be," she replied. He turned to her, his voice barely a whisper. "You did all of this alone. I don't know how." Her expression softened, just a fraction. "You learn," she said. "You don't have a choice." When he left that night, he paused outside her door for a moment, wanting to say something more, but lacking the courage. Instead, he looked through the small window at the sleeping children on the sofa. For the first time, he didn't feel like a man standing outside their world. He felt like someone who might someday be allowed to step in. On the drive home, his chest ached with a strange combination of guilt and hope. He knew earning her forgiveness would take time, maybe years, but for once, he wasn't afraid of the weight. Over the next few weeks, he started finding small, quiet ways to help. He anonymously paid for repairs to the bakery after a storm, damaged their roof, arranged new supplies for the boys' school without ever mentioning it, and not once used his name to take credit. Ilara found out eventually, of course. She always did. She showed up at his office one evening, her expression unreadable. "You don't need to fix everything," she said. When he tried to explain himself, "I'm not trying to fix it," he replied. "I'm trying to give back what I took away." She didn't argue after that, but something in her eyes changed, just slightly. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was no longer resistance. That night, when he returned home, he stood by his window again, watching the city lights. For years, those lights had represented success to him, proof that he had conquered the world. Now, all he could think about was the warm glow of her kitchen, the soft laughter of two boys drawing on the floor, and the quiet strength of the woman who had learned to live without him. For the first time in his life, he didn't feel like the richest man in the city. He felt like a man who was finally beginning to understand what it meant to have something worth losing. Don't go anywhere. The next chapter brings the moment that changes everything. Alexander faces the total loss of his empire. Like this video if you think this is the only way he can truly be a good father, and subscribe. Chapter 5. The Autumn Decision. Autumn arrived quietly that year, painting the coastal town in shades of gold and rust, and with it came a kind of peace neither of them fully understood. Alexander had become a quiet presence in Ilara's world, never demanding, never pushing too hard, but always there in small, consistent ways that began to soften the tension between them. Sometimes he would show up at the bakery when business was slow, ordering a coffee he never drank, just to sit at the corner table and watch her work. At first, she ignored him, pretending he wasn't there. But eventually, their glances began to linger. Sometimes he would help her close up, wiping down tables or fixing the old shelving that always seemed to wobble. He found it strange to see the same man who once wore suits worth more than her annual rent, now carrying boxes and sweeping floors without complaint. He didn't seem to care about the looks from regular customers, or what anyone might think. The arrogance that once defined him was gone, replaced by a kind of humility that disarmed her, even as she tried to resist. One evening, after closing, they walked together down the quiet street lined with flickering lampposts. The boys were asleep at home with a neighbor, and for the first time in years, they were alone without anger floating between them. The air was crisp, smelling faintly of rain, and their footsteps echoed softly on the pavement. Ilara finally broke the silence. "Why are you really doing this, Alexander?" she asked, her voice quiet yet guarded. "You don't owe me anything anymore. You don't owe them either." He stopped walking and looked at her, the dim light catching in his brown eyes. "That's where you're wrong," he said quietly. "I owe you everything. You gave me something real, and I threw it away because I was too afraid to face how I felt. I thought success would fill that space. It didn't." She studied him for a moment, as if trying to see if he truly meant it. "People don't just change like that," she said softly. He smiled, but there was no pride in it, just sadness. "No," he agreed, "but they can try to be better." The next morning, he showed up at the boys' school for Parents' Day. Ilara hadn't asked him to come, but he showed up anyway, standing awkwardly among the other fathers with a paper coffee cup in his hand. When Leo saw him through the classroom window, he waved excitedly, shouting, "Mom, the man is here again!" Ilara felt a flash of embarrassment, but also something else, something warmer she couldn't quite name. During the activity, the children were asked to draw their families. Leo and Finn sat together, whispering and coloring with exaggerated seriousness. When they handed in their drawings, Ilara's heart stopped for a moment. There were 4 figures now, not 3. 2 small ones, a woman, and a tall man with brown hair. "That's us," said Finn proudly. "And that's him." He pointed to Alexander, who was watching from a few feet away, unaware of what they were saying. Ilara felt a lump in her chest. She looked at her sons, their faces glowing with innocence, and realized she couldn't shield them forever from the truth of who he was. Later that evening, as he walked her home, she handed him the boy's drawing without a word. He stared at it for a long time, his throat tight. "They see me as part of this," he whispered. She nodded slowly. "They see kindness," she said quietly, "and they trust kindness." He looked up at her then, something breaking open in his expression. "I don't deserve that," he said. "Maybe not," she countered, "but they don't know what you've done. They only know who you are now." Her words floated in the air between them, like a fragile truth neither of them dared to touch. Over the next few weeks, she began to allow him into their lives more fully. He picked the boys up from school when she worked late, helped with homework, even fixed the broken door on her apartment that had been stuck for months. The children attached themselves to him quickly, their laughter filling spaces that had once felt heavy and silent. Sometimes, late at night, Ilara would hear them talking about him in their room, about how funny he was, how he told stories, how he never got angry when they spilled juice on his expensive shoes. Those small details ached in her heart in ways she couldn't explain. She wanted to stay angry, to hold on to the past, but the walls she had built were starting to crumble. She saw the way he looked at the children, the quiet wonder in his eyes, and she knew it wasn't just guilt bringing him back. It was love. One night, after the boys were asleep, she found him sitting at the kitchen table, his head in his hands, papers scattered around him. "What is it?" she asked softly. He looked up, exhausted. "I'm selling the company," he said, almost disbelieving his own words. "I don't want it anymore. Not like this." She stared at him, startled. "You spent your entire life building it." He let out a small, tired laugh. "And for what? To sit in an empty office and pretend it matters? I spent years collecting things that meant nothing while ignoring the one thing that did." She didn't know what to say. There was a sincerity in his voice that both terrified her and gave her a strange kind of hope. "Alexander," she whispered, "you don't have to destroy everything to prove you've changed." He shook his head. "I'm not destroying it. I'm freeing myself from it. I want to live for something real." That night, they sat together in silence, the snow falling in slow swirls outside. There were no grand gestures, no confessions, just 2 people sitting in the quiet after years of noise, realizing that perhaps this was what healing looked like. She picked up the cup of tea he hadn't touched and handed it to him. He smiled faintly, and for a brief moment, her hand brushed his. The contact was accidental, yet it felt like a spark, like something that had been waiting years to return. Neither of them spoke, but the silence between them felt warm for the first time. Comment: The Empire, if you think selling his company is the ultimate proof that Alexander has changed. And subscribe to see how this saga of redemption ends. Chapter 6. The Return Home. In the days that followed, Ilara noticed subtle shifts in herself. The walls she had spent years building no longer felt so solid. When Alexander smiled, she didn't look away as quickly. When he stayed late, she didn't find reasons for him to leave. The children began asking when he would move in, innocent to the complexity of adult hearts, and she found herself unable to give them an answer. One night, while tucking them in, Leo asked, "Mom, why do you look sad when you smile at him?" She froze for a moment, then kissed his forehead. "Because sometimes happiness takes time," she whispered. That night, when she returned to the living room, Alexander was standing by the window again, watching the snow. He turned when he heard her footsteps. Do you ever think about how it could have been? He asked quietly. She hesitated, then nodded. Sometimes. But if it hadn't happened the way it did, we wouldn't be here now. He smiled faintly, and there was something like relief in his eyes. Then maybe everything I broke was meant to bring me back to you. She stared at him for a long moment before finally whispering, "Don't make promises, Alexander. Just stay." And this time, he didn't answer with words. He simply nodded. And in that silence, something between them finally began to heal. Spring arrived gently, almost hesitantly, as if the world was testing if it was ready to be warm again. The snow melted into the earth, leaving behind trails of green that promised renewal, and with it came a sense of calm Alara hadn't felt in years. The bakery was busier now. The boys had grown taller and bolder, and Alexander had settled into their lives like a rhythm they hadn't realized they were missing. There was no announcement, no moment when he officially became part of their home. It just happened, quietly, as if the universe had always intended for him to find his way back. He began staying over more often, cooking breakfast with the boys on weekends, fixing the broken things in the apartment Alara had learned to ignore, driving them to school before heading off to meetings that now seemed secondary to everything else. The walls of her life that once felt too small for her dreams now felt like a home again, filled with laughter and the sound of 3 voices calling out to her. Alexander had sold his company as promised, a decision that shocked the world but didn't surprise Alara. He invested some of the money back into the community, starting a small foundation to support single mothers and children in need. For the first time, he felt pride in something not because it made him powerful, but because it made him human. He no longer measured success by what he owned, but by who he was when he came home at night. One warm afternoon, they all went to the park, the same one where he had first seen them after 6 years of silence. It looked different now. Or perhaps it was he who had changed. The trees were full again. The air smelled of blossoms and sunlight, and laughter echoed across the open space. The boys were running with a soccer ball, shouting for him to hurry up, their voices full of that bright, reckless joy only children could hold. Alara sat on a blanket under the same oak tree as before, her hair catching the light like threads of gold, her smile soft and quiet. When he reached her side, slightly breathless, he sat down next to her and watched the scene in front of him. For a moment, he said nothing, afraid that if he spoke, the fragile beauty of it all might disappear. Finally, he turned to her and said quietly, "I never thought I'd be the man sitting here." She looked at him, her eyes warm. "That's because you weren't ready to be," she said softly. "You had to lose everything to understand what it meant to have something worth keeping." They watched the boys play for a while in a comfortable silence. The past no longer hung between them like a shadow. It was still there, but it had softened into something that no longer hurt. It was part of their story, something that shaped them, but no longer defined them. Alexander reached for her hand and laced his fingers with hers. She didn't pull away. The gesture was simple, quiet, and yet it carried more meaning than any words. "You once asked me if I thought happiness was worth everything," he said after a while. "I used to think no. Now I know it's the only thing that matters." She smiled, her thumb brushing his hand. "You finally stopped running," she said. He nodded, "because I realized I was running from myself." As the sun began to dip, casting a golden light over the field, the boys came running back, their cheeks flushed and their hair messy. Leo threw himself into his mother's lap, while Finn dropped down beside Alexander, handing him the soccer ball. "You were too slow," said Finn with mock seriousness. Alexander laughed, ruffling his hair. "I'm getting old," he said. "You'll have to carry me next time." The boys burst into giggles, and Alara leaned her head against his shoulder. The sound of their joy wrapped around them like music, a melody of second chances and new beginnings. When the park quieted, and the light began to fade. They gathered their things and headed home. Alexander walked beside Alara, his arm brushing hers, the children running ahead and turning back every few steps to make sure they were still following. The air was cool and sweet, and everything felt impossibly alive. He looked at her and said quietly, "Do you ever think about the day we met again in this park?" She nodded, her smile nostalgic. "I think about it often. It felt like fate was giving you one last chance." He laughed softly. "Then I'm glad I finally listened." Later that night, after the boys were asleep, they stood on the small balcony looking up at the stars. The city lights flickered below, the world silent around them. Alara turned to him, her voice barely a whisper. "Do you regret anything?" He thought for a moment, then shook his head. "No," he said, "because every mistake brought me here." She smiled faintly. "You sound like a man who has finally made peace with himself." He stared at her for a long moment, his expression soft. "I think I have. Because peace isn't something you find. It's something you build." When she reached for his hand again, he held it without hesitation, and for the first time in years, neither of them felt the weight of what had been lost. They only felt the warmth of what had been found. The man who once scoffed at the idea of love now knew it was the only thing that could save him, and the woman who once vowed never to let him back in finally realized that forgiveness was her own form of freedom. And so our emotional saga of redemption concludes. This story is proof that true wealth is not measured in millions, but in the ability to face the truth, even when it hurts. Alexander lost an empire, but he gained his soul and a family. Comment with the word redemption if you believe Alexander truly redeemed himself and that Alara made the right choice. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. What kind of saga or story would you like us to write next? Let us know your idea. Chapter 7. Building the Unbreakable. The early days of summer in Maine brought a kind of profound, quiet happiness that Alexander had never known existed. He woke up not to the harsh glare of his Manhattan penthouse, but to the gentle scent of Alara's baking and the chaotic symphony of two twin boys demanding pancakes. The shift from ruthless CEO to dedicated father and partner was jarring. But every morning, every sticky hug, and every quiet moment with Alara was a conscious affirmation that he had chosen correctly. Alexander had fully transitioned out of Thorn Global Capital, handing the reins to a trusted, though somewhat bewildered, protege. He now spent his days focused on the local foundation he had started, using his business acumen not to acquire wealth, but to empower the community. This work, coupled with the simple rhythm of family life, was the only thing that made him feel truly successful. Yet building a future on a foundation of broken trust was not without its tremors. One Tuesday evening, the silence between Alexander and Alara stretched a little too thin. They were finishing the dishes, a simple, domestic ritual they had come to share, when Alara cleared her throat. "I got a call today from the foundation," she said, keeping her gaze on the plate she was wiping. Alexander paused, sensing the shift in her tone. "Oh, everything okay?" "Yes, they want me to head the new arts program for the kids. It's a major step up. It would mean taking a real salary and having a much bigger role." He smiled, genuinely thrilled. "That's incredible, Alara. You deserve it. You're a phenomenal artist." She finally looked at him, and he saw a flicker of doubt in her eyes. "Thank you, but the role also means travel. I'd have to go to Boston sometimes, maybe a few overnight trips a month for board meetings and fundraising." The news landed in the quiet kitchen with unexpected force. Alexander felt a familiar, cold tension tighten his chest, the ghost of his old fear of losing control, of separation. Before he could filter it, the old, protective, and slightly arrogant voice spoke up. You don't need to travel for money anymore, Alara, he heard himself say. You could focus on your art here. We're fine. I can easily cover all expenses. She put the plate down with a quiet clink that felt louder than a shout. I know what we can afford, Alexander, she said, her voice measured but firm. But this isn't about money. It's about me. It's about having my own work, my own success, something that is mine and that I built. I didn't spend 6 years learning to stand on my own 2 feet just to rely on your comfort now. His face paled instantly as he realized his mistake. He had reverted, just for a moment, to the old Alexander, the one who thought he could solve everything with his influence and his wallet, the one who tried to manage her life to ease his own anxiety. I apologize, he said, the words heavy with genuine regret. That was completely out of line. I wasn't thinking. I just panicked a little when you said travel. It brought up old fears. Not about you, but about me being alone again. Alara's expression softened slightly, seeing the raw honesty in his eyes. I know, she admitted, stepping closer. But we have to remember why we're here. We're here because I chose to be strong, and you chose to respect that strength. If you ever try to clip my wings again, even out of fear, we have nothing. He took her hands, his touch grounding. You're right. Go. Take the job. Chase that success. We'll make it work. I'll handle the boys. I'll drive them to every soccer practice, every art class. I promise I will be your rock here, not your chain. A true smile finally broke across her face. That's the man I need, she said softly. The incident, though minor, was a crucial test. It showed them that redemption wasn't a destination. It was a daily choice to fight the ghosts of their past. Interactive question. If you were Alara, after Alexander's initial slip, how long would it take you to trust him completely with her career ambition? Comment with a time frame, 6 months, 1 year, or never, and explain your reasoning. Chapter 8. The Ghost of Thorn. Global as Alexander settled into his new, grounded life, the outside world occasionally tried to pull him back. He still owned a minority stake in his former firm, and the new CEO, sensing an opportunity, made a move that threatened the firm's legacy. Something Alexander couldn't ignore. He was sitting in his modest home office, reviewing documents related to a predatory takeover attempt by a rival firm, when the phone rang. It was his former protege. Sir, we need your help, the voice pleaded. The board is split on this acquisition. It's reckless. It puts thousands of jobs at risk, and it goes against everything we built. The pressure was immense. Alexander knew he could fly back to Manhattan, rally the old guard, and stop the move in a single day. He could be Alexander Thorn, the Titan, one more time. He looked up from his papers to see Leo and Finn burst into the room, wearing oversized capes and pretending to be superheroes. Dad! Dad! We need your help! Finn shouted, brandishing a wooden sword. The dragon is attacking the Pillow Fort. Alexander felt a profound tug of war. The call of his old power, the thrill of the fight, was tempting. But the sheer, uncomplicated joy of the moment in front of him was stronger. He set the phone down, muted the call, and knelt on the floor. A dragon, you say? He asked, his voice adopting a theatrical seriousness. Well, it seems like the fate of the entire living room rests on my shoulders. He spent the next 30 minutes battling the imaginary threat, his expensive suit rumpled, his hair messy, laughing until his sides hurt. Later, after the boys were in bed, he explained the situation to Alara. I can save the company, he told her, his voice low. I can prevent a lot of innocent people from losing their jobs. It's one flight, 1 day of meetings, and I'm back. Alara listened, her hands folded in her lap. She looked not at the millionaire who could wield power, but at the man who had battled a pillow dragon. I know you can, Alexander, she said softly. and I know you feel a responsibility to those people. Go. But I need you to understand one thing. If you go back to that world, you need to remember why you left. If you come home with the scent of ambition on you, if you start checking stock prices at the dinner table, I will know you haven't truly left it behind." He took her face in his hands, his eyes searching hers. "I promise you, my heart lives here now. I will go, I will finish what I started, and I will sever all ties for good. I will choose us, always." The next morning, Alexander took the early flight to Manhattan. He walked into the Thorne Global Board meeting, no longer dressed in the armor of a CEO, but with the quiet, authoritative confidence of a man who had nothing to prove. He was swift, surgical, and decisive. He convinced the board to vote down the reckless acquisition and, in a shocking move, sold his remaining shares, making his break from the company complete and final. He didn't stay for the celebration dinner or the media frenzy. He was back on a flight to Maine by dusk. He arrived home late, the house dark and quiet. He found Alara asleep in bed, and he slipped in beside her. She stirred, her eyes fluttering open. "You're back," she murmured, her voice thick with sleep and relief. "I'm back," he whispered, pulling her close. "I severed the last tie. It's done." He spent the next hour just holding her, listening to the quiet breathing of his family. He had walked away from billions, from the pinnacle of corporate power, but lying there, he knew he was the richest man in the world, because he was home, and he was loved. Conclusion: the forever choice. Years passed, flowing into a steady, beautiful stream of shared moments. Leo and Finn grew into strong, kind young men, known for their sharp minds and gentle hearts, a blend of their mother's artistic soul and their father's quiet intensity. Alexander and Alara's love story became a legend in their small town, a tale of how a titan fell from grace only to rise again as a man, choosing love, humility, and family over the glittering emptiness of an empire. One crisp autumn day, exactly 10 years after he had scoffed at the idea of sacrifice, Alexander sat with Alara on the porch of the home they had built together. The air was cool, the scent of pine strong. "Do you ever look at the boys and wonder?" Alexander asked, his voice thoughtful. Alara smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Every day. I wonder what kind of man you'd be if I had never left. But I know this, you wouldn't be this man." He turned, gently kissing her temple. "You leaving me was the greatest gift I ever received. You forced me to see the price of my pride." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, velvet box. Alara's eyes widened. He knelt before her, not in a grand gesture, but with quiet, absolute certainty. "Alara Vance," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "I chose the wrong ring 10 years ago. It wasn't the diamond or the wealth. It was the chain of my own fear. Today, I'm asking you to wear this, a promise that the man who kneels before you is yours, completely and irrevocably. Will you marry me, and let us build the rest of our forever?" Tears filled her eyes as she saw the simple, elegant silver ring, a perfect circle, symbolizing their complete and unbroken journey. "Yes, Alexander," she whispered, pulling him into a hug that tasted like 10 years of patience and a lifetime of love. 1,000 times. Yes. Their wedding was small, quiet, and perfect, held in the same park where he first saw the reflection of his soul in the eyes of his children. Alexander Thorne had finally found his true empire, and it was nestled firmly in the arms of his family. The moral of their story? The true price of pride is the things you miss while chasing what doesn't matter. But the beautiful truth of the universe is that redemption is always possible, provided you are willing to lose everything to gain the one thing that matters most. Comment your favorite moment from Alexander and Alara's saga. Final call to action. If you believe in second chances and everlasting love, like this video, share it with a friend who needs a reminder that change is possible, and subscribe to our channel for more uplifting and dramatic stories. What story should we write next? A thrilling espionage saga? A historical romance? Tell us below. Would you like me to translate and summarize the main themes of this extended story back into Vietnamese? Or would you like to move on to a new story idea? Quá tuyệt vời. Tôi rất vui vì bạn vẫn muốn tiếp tục câu chuyện. Chapter 9. The Last Shadow of the Empire. The quiet life Alexander and Alara had built in Maine was a fortress of happiness, cemented by their simple wedding and the constant reassuring presence of their sons. Alexander was thriving, pouring his considerable intellect into the foundation, finding immense satisfaction in the work that genuinely helped people. He had finally mastered the art of being present. However, the past, particularly one built on billion-dollar risks, rarely dissolves without a final echo. 6 months after their wedding, a sleek black car with Manhattan plates pulled up to their unassuming coastal home. A woman in a razor-sharp suit, carrying a heavy briefcase, emerged. It was Victoria Stern, the lead partner from the law firm that had represented Thorn Global Capital for decades. Alexander met her on the porch, a quiet certainty radiating from him that immediately put Victoria on edge. He wasn't the arrogant titan she remembered. He was a man firmly rooted. "Alexander, I apologize for the intrusion," Victoria said, her voice clipped. "But this is urgent. A major class action lawsuit has been filed against Thorn Global, and by extension, against all former senior partners, including you." Alexander didn't flinch. "What is the basis?" "It relates to a hostile takeover you finalized 7 years ago. The Synergy deal. They're claiming market manipulation and massive financial fraud. The new CEO is trying to shift all liability onto the former leadership. The liability alone could exceed $100 million. The number hung in the air, a colossal, chilling reminder of the world he had left behind. Alexander had settled most of his assets into trusts for the boys in the foundation, but a legal judgment that large could still threaten their current life, their home, and the foundation itself. The old Alexander would have been energized by the fight. The new Alexander felt only cold dread. He was no longer fighting for profit or power. He was fighting to protect the fragile peace he had won. Alara, having heard the commotion, stepped onto the porch. She didn't ask questions. She simply stood beside Alexander, placing a steady, warm hand on his back. Victoria, who had never seen the formidable Alexander Thorn display such quiet intimacy, momentarily lost her composure. "My client has deep pockets," Victoria pressed. "We need to hit back hard, Alexander. We need to go for the throat, just like old times." Alexander looked down at Alara's hand, then out at the glittering ocean. His decision wasn't about winning. It was about integrity. "No, Victoria," he said, his voice quiet, but firm. "No more hitting below the belt. If there was a wrong, we will find it and we will right it. I didn't leave that world to drag its poison back here." Hibait agreed to handle his own defense, but on one strict condition: no ruthlessness, no manipulation, only the truth. The following weeks were difficult. Alexander spent his days navigating legal documents and conference calls, the familiar, dark energy of Wall Street trying to infiltrate the sunlight of his new life. Alara watched him, anxious but supportive. She saw the strain on his face, the way the old, calculating expression sometimes flickered back into his eyes. One evening, Alexander snapped his laptop shut in frustration, letting out a heavy sigh. "This is exhausting, Alara. I just want it to be over." "It will be," she said, leaning against the doorframe. But you have to remember who you are now, Alexander. That lawsuit is the last piece of your old empire trying to own you. You chose to be a good man. Now be a good man fighting a bad fight." Her words were his anchor. He approached the defense not with a desire to crush his opponents, but with a forensic commitment to the truth. He discovered that the fraud lay not in his original decision, but in the subsequent cover-up by a rogue junior partner who had feared disappointing the Titan. Alexander didn't just clear his name, he exposed the truth, working with the plaintiff's lawyers to identify the real culprits and secure a fair settlement that recovered the losses. He took no personal credit, insisting the focus be on restitution. He walked away from the entire legal ordeal, not just unscathed, but with his integrity fully restored. The final call came late one night. Victoria was on the line, genuinely impressed. "You did it, Alexander. You settled it, and you did it clean. No one expected that. You could have destroyed the firm, but you chose to save its reputation and your own soul." Alexander smiled, looking at the sleeping faces of his sons and the peaceful expression of his wife. "The stakes were higher this time, Victoria," he said. "I wasn't fighting for money. I was fighting for my home." Interactive. Question: Alexander chose to fight the lawsuit with integrity rather than ruthlessness. If he had chosen ruthlessness and saved himself millions instantly, do you think Alara would have eventually left him, even after their wedding? Comment yes or no, and explain the price of his moral victory. Epilogue. The New Dynasty. The successful resolution of the lawsuit marked the final, decisive separation from his past. Alexander Thorne, the relentless CEO, was finally and permanently laid to rest. What remained was a man who understood that his greatest asset was not capital, but character. The years that followed were dedicated to a singular, beautiful purpose: building the new Thorne dynasty, a dynasty founded on art, kindness, and community service. Alara's arts program flourished, becoming a beacon of creativity for underprivileged youth. Alexander's foundation expanded, truly changing lives across the state. Leo and Finn, now teenagers, were inseparable, often volunteering at the foundation or helping their mother with art projects, embodying the perfect balance of their parents' spirits. They saw their father not as a former billionaire, but as the man who taught them how to fix a leaky faucet, the man who never missed a game, and the man who always chose honesty. One day, while reviewing the Foundation's annual report, Alexander looked at the numbers. Millions of dollars redirected to help others, and realized he had never felt richer. He walked out to the porch where Alara was reading. He sat down and simply placed his hand over hers. "I was thinking," he said softly, "about that day 6 years ago when I scoffed at you. I thought I was protecting my empire. All I was doing was setting myself up to lose the real one." Alara lifted their joined hands and kissed his knuckles. "You paid the price of pride, my love," she said, "and the reward was worth every painful moment." Their life was a testament to the fact that it is never too late to rewrite your legacy. Alexander had started with nothing, gained the world, lost his soul, and then, by a simple choice of the heart, gained everything that truly mattered. He was finally free. He was finally home. And his new, unbreakable empire was sitting right beside him. Thank you for following the saga of Alexander and Alara. Final call to action: like this video. If you believe Alexander's ultimate victory was his moral redemption, share this saga with anyone who needs hope. Subscribe for more compelling stories of love, life, and second chances. What lesson from Alexander's life resonated the most with you?